will challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives of Joe Samueli. It is now 9:07 p.m. in, yes, as you might have expected, a very grim, dark, cold, miserable, sunless, lightless, rain-filled, um, um, uh, grim city of Budapest, and it's not getting any better. The outline of what the sun looks like is now largely a very distant memory, and it's only November the 20th. We've got a lot of more of this misery to come. So, having presented this very cheerful introduction, welcome to the Thursday night edition of the Gaggle live stream. Thank you for joining us. And obviously, the big news that we're all talking about is the so-called Trump um, 28-point peace plan. 28 points. That's quite a peace plan. Now, one has to say right away that we have, we've been here and we've done that. We've had these Trump plans before, and they've somehow not really led to anything very much. So it's a very, it's like it really is a case of deja vu all over again. We got, Trump puts forward a plan. The Europeans and the media have a hysterical meltdown. They haven't actually seen the details of the plan, but they already know that this is really, really terrible, very, very pro-Russian. It gives Putin everything that he wants, and this is the end of, and of course, it's Munich all over again, and so on. So the story of the plan was broken initially by Axios, and Axios is usually very good about in its sourcing. I mean, it does seem to have very good sources, and so here was this report written by really the key breaker of stories, which is the guy Barak Ravid, and here was what he reported yesterday. So it says the scoop. Trump plan asks Ukraine to cede additional territory for security guarantee. And then they say again that the Trump plan would grant Russia parts of eastern Ukraine it does not currently control in exchange for a U.S. security guarantee for Ukraine and Europe against future Russian aggression. Ukraine and its backers would see that as an enormous concession to Russia. The White House view, according to a U.S. official, is that Ukraine is likely to lose the territory anyways if the war continues, and therefore it is in Ukraine's interest to reach a deal now. And then the two thorniest issues in the Ukraine talks up to now have been who will control what territory once the war is over, and how Ukraine can be assured that Russia won't simply resume the war at a later date. And then the 28-point Trump plan calls for Russia to gain full de facto control of Lugansk and Donetsk, despite Ukraine still controlling 14.5% of the territory. Despite being under Russian control, the areas in Donbass from which Ukraine would withdraw would be considered a demilitarized zone, with Russia not being able to position troops there. And then in two other war-torn regions, Kherson and Zaporozhye, the current lines of control would mostly be frozen in place, with Russia returning some land subject to negotiations. And then, according to the Trump plan, the US and other countries would recognize Crimea and the Donbass as lawfully Russian territory, but Ukraine would not be asked to. Um, and then there's Ukrainian responses. And then, according to two sources with direct knowledge, Qatar and Turkey are involved in the drafting of the new Trump plan. And uh, and then there's this Umerov, the Ukrainian defense minister, was involved in negotiations with Witkoff in Miami. Um, and uh, and then it says the Ukrainian official denied Zelensky's advisor accepted the terms of the plan. Prior to meeting Umerov, Witkoff held extensive discussions on the plan with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev. He's the guy who heads the Sovereign Russian Fund. As part of the Turkish support for Trump's peace initiative, Witkoff planned to visit Ankara on Wednesday and hold a trilateral meeting with Zelensky and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. That didn't happen. And then the U.S. official claimed the meeting was postponed when it became clear that Zelensky was walking back from the understandings reached with Umerov and is not interested in discussing the Trump plan. Anyway, so that's, and then let's talk in a moment about the Financial Times. Now, as we look at this, um, somebody says, George, you can beat the gas bills in Hungary by wearing a house coat. Now, I think that's right. The one drawback from that is that I really find it very difficult to live in an apartment where the windows are closed. I don't know, just have some breathing issues. So I always have to have the window open, somewhat. And of course, that does drastically lower the room temperature and therefore drastically raises the costs of the gas. But anyway, to return to the plan. So just going by what the Axios report said, this bears quite strong resemblances to the agreements. Well, they were not reached exactly, but were at least presented, and the American side decided that we will consider this proposal, but we will discuss this with Zelensky, and we'll discuss it with our European allies. And it's clear from all the interviews that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that what was agreed upon in Alaska was something along those lines, which is Ukraine would withdraw from the Donbass. In Kherson and Zaporozhye, the line of contact would be frozen in place, and the Russians seem to agree to that. Now, Lavrov seemed to suggest that Trump was amenable to this deal, but was thrown off his stride by the Europeans, who, as you recall, rushed to Washington within 48 hours to try to dissuade Trump from agreeing to this. But clearly, Trump and Witkoff are still figuring that this has to be the basis of any kind of a deal. Something like the Donbass, Russia gets that, and then there's the conflict is frozen in Kherson and Zaporozhye. However, this agreement or this deal seems to go a little bit further, because at least if you read the Financial Times account, there are aspects to this that went beyond what apparently was discussed at Anchorage, And here, the Trump administration, Russian official, drawn up sweeping new proposal to end Russia's war in Ukraine. And uh, and then it goes on. The plan was conveyed to Kiev this week by Steve Witkoff and so on. And then it says, yeah, according to people with knowledge of a document about the draft plan, it would require Ukraine to cede the remainder of the eastern Donbass and cut the size of its armed forces by half. So that's in the Financial Times account. It wasn't in the Axios story. And here it says, crucially, it also calls for Ukraine to abandon key categories of weaponry and would include the rollback of U.S. military assistance that has been vital to its defense, potentially leaving the country vulnerable to future Russian aggression. Additionally, no foreign troops would be allowed on Ukrainian soil. The key. Additionally, no foreign troops would be allowed on Ukrainian soil, and Kiev would no longer receive Western long-range weapons that can reach deep inside Russia. Now, if no foreign troops would be allowed on Ukrainian soil, then you wonder, what does it mean, which is the story that was in Axios, that Ukraine would get some security guarantees. So because if you have no foreign troops, then what are security guarantees? And then he goes on. The plan would also stipulate that Russian would be recognized as an official state language in Ukraine and grant formal status to the local branch of the Russian Orthodox Church. And then, it says the officials in Kiev briefed on the plan, said it closely aligned with the Kremlin's maximalist demands, adding that it would be a non-starter for Ukraine without significant changes. The issue, then the proposal comes as Zelensky's political position in Ukraine has weakened because of the corruption scandal, and so on. Now, so then the question then here is, how seriously should we take all of this? Because again, we've been here before. We had the meeting in Anchorage when it seems like there was some that came to some kind of an understanding, and then of course we had the phone conversation between Trump and Putin, in which they agreed that there would be a summit meeting in Budapest, and everything seemed to be all set. Viktor Orban was already talking about, yeah, this is Budapest, that's the place to meet, island of peace, and so on. So here was the unspeakable, horrible Kaya Kallas today. Here are her comments. Look at, notice that she's always got that smirk on her face. She always looks so pleased with herself. She's always striding forward, very purposefully, with that very self-satisfied smirk on her face.
So we have a very packed agenda today. So first we're going to discuss Ukraine. We had a very good plan to discuss very specifically what more can we do with the shadow fleet, because it really has an effect on Russia's revenues to finance this war. But of course, now we are going to discuss also, the recent news. What we as Europeans have always supported is a long lasting and just peace, and we welcome any efforts to achieve that. Of course, for any plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans on board. So this is very clear. Also, we have to...
So there it is. She said the Ukrainians and the Europeans have to be on board. Now, the moment you bring the Ukrainians and the Europeans on board, as we found out immediately after the Anchorage summit, the moment that happens, then there's no deal. And she knows perfectly well, then there's no deal. The whole purpose of bringing Ukrainians and Europeans on board is to sabotage any possibility of a deal. And there she is talking about shadow fleets and sanctions and and the rest. So everything continues as before.
Understand that in this war there is one aggressor and one victim.
So in this war, there's one aggressor, one victim. So that's how she's defined the war, and therefore, obviously, we know what we have to do. We have to fight the aggressor on behalf of the victim. When we say we of course mean with the United States.
we haven't heard of any concessions on the Russian side. I mean, if Russia really wanted peace, it could have, agreed to unconditional ceasefire already some time ago. Whereas we see,
All right, here we go, and then of course we're back to the unconditional ceasefire, and of course we already know that Russia's not going to accept an unconditional ceasefire, and it has never been the case at any time that the condition of any peace agreement was that there should be an unconditional ceasefire as a preliminary to a peace agreement. The ceasefire is what you get when you get an agreement. Nobody demanded that of Israel while there were all the negotiations taking place for that for the recent deal in Gaza. And that was well, there has to be an unconditional ceasefire on Israel's part, and then we can begin to talk. But of course, that's exactly what Kaya Kallas and the Europeans want. They said an unconditional ceasefire, and then of course nothing happens. They continue to arm Ukraine, and negotiations will just be kicked down the road, in perpetuity. So this is all complete nonsense. Everyone who knows this is nonsense, and of course the Russians know it's nonsense, but they keep repeating this. Oh, an unconditional ceasefire. Um, and because but there are no conditions on us because we will continue to arm and Ukraine and continue to send our forces into Ukraine to train Ukraine.
again, over this night, bombings of civilians, 93% of Russian targets have been civilian infrastructure. I mean, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, too.
So this is again, she's talking such utter nonsense because if Russian targets were civilians, why are there so limited civilian casualties? Almost all the casualties are of military personnel on both sides. The casualties have been of military personnel. It's very, very, very little. There have obviously been some civilian casualties, but very limited. But the NATO propaganda is, oh, Russia only targets civilians. Well, if they only target civilians, then we would have, very, very high civilian casualties, which of course we don't have.
To really, kill a lot of people and cause as much suffering as possible. So this is our standing. Now we also discuss Middle East.
Okay, and then we go to the Middle East. So anyway, that was her response. Now, obviously, the question arises, and there's been a lot of speculation in the media about this. Was was this a move on Trump's part to exploit Zelensky's weakness at home because of the corruption scandal? And there's superficially, I think that theory sounds reasonably plausible. The that oh well, Zelensky is in a weak position now. He's not really in a position to bang his fist on the table and demand anything. And so now's the time to lower the boom on Zelensky. I do have my doubts about that. First off, if this deal, this proposal is reasonably serious as as the media reporting it, then Zelensky would have to make very, very major concessions in coming to an agreement. Well, when you're in a politically weak position, you're not in great shape to make a lot of concessions. You're already unpopular. This is going to really, um, make you extremely unpopular and indeed vulnerable to assassination attempts. It's going to be very hard for him to avoid a coup or an assassination, given his weak condition. And now he's going to sign this deal, so that doesn't sound believable. There's also the aspect of it which is Nabu, and we talked about this before. This Nabu, this corruption, this anti-corruption agency. This Nabu and Sapo, they were set up by the Europeans, but they were also set up by the Obama administration, and so they are rather the people around them, and the Sorosites and the various satellite NGOs that surround Nabu. Um, they are, they're liberal nationalists. They are, if anything, more Russophobic and more gung ho about continuing the war than maybe even Zelensky is. So it's very unlikely that they would have brought up this whole corruption thing um, in order to weaken Zelensky, in order to get him to sign an agreement. So that theory that somehow Trump and Nabu are working in tandem to weaken Zelensky and thereby help facilitate this agreement, it just doesn't sound believable. Apart from anything else, as I say, Nabu, these are the Sorosites. These are aligned with the U.S. Democratic Party. I mean, they were set up under Obama. They are aligned with the U.S. Democratic Party because if you recall, Nabu interfered in the 2016 election because it was Nabu that released the information about Paul Manafort that sank, Manafort's position as campaign manager for Trump. That was released by Nabu because they're aligned with the Democratic Party. They very much want this war to continue, and this this whole thing was really done in order to ensure that Zelensky stays the course. Because as I said the other day, the the concern that the Democrats had, the concern that the EU had, almost from the beginning, from 2019, from when Zelensky first emerged on the scene and then won the election in a spectacular fashion, the concern that they had was that Zelensky is Kolomoisky's boy, and that Kolomoisky, that shady oligarch, actually wanted to do a deal with Russia. And when you remember, Kolomoisky had given an interview in, I think, 2016 to the New York Times, in which he said, "This war is ridiculous. We need to work out a deal with Russia." And Kolomoisky, is an oligarch, very rich man, and his business interests were being damaged by this war. And so Kolomoisky, he gave this interview to the New York Times, in which he said, this war needs to come to an end. That's 2016. That's long before the launch of this so-called SMO. So when Zelensky emerged in 2019, and he was clearly Kolomoisky's boy, there was a real concern that Zelensky would pursue reconciliation with Russia, and he would pursue a peace in the Donbass. And look, that's exactly what he did. I mean, he, at least initially, he did seem to want to bring this war to an end, and he did seem to want to, um, improve relations with Russia. He was thrown off that course, but but the point is that Nabu and the rest of them, Nabu, they had no interest whatsoever. The Nabu, the Sorosites, the U.S. Democratic Party, the EU, they never had any interest in trying to pursue that goal of peace in the Donbass and reconciliation with Russia. So they never trusted Zelensky and wanted to maintain Nabu there as a means of keeping Zelensky in line. So that's why I'm not buying the theory that Trump and Nabu were working together in order to weaken Zelensky's position. Nabu has no interest at all in any kind of a peace deal with Russia. Trump may well have. I'm absolutely sure that Trump does have that goal in mind, but it's going to be very difficult for him because he's got enormous forces arrayed against him who are absolutely rigidly determined, just as we saw with Kaya Kallas, to keep this war going and to make sure that there is no deal to be had. So today, this General Dan Driscoll was in Kiev, and he met with Zelensky. And apparently, he presented Zelensky with this plan. And then Zelensky, after this meeting with Driscoll, issued this tweet. And there's no, that's not it. Let's see. Yeah. So he issued this. Today, during a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of the Army, Daniel Driscoll, we discussed options for achieving real peace, the sequencing of our work, and formats for dialogue, as well as new impulses for diplomacy. Our teams of Ukraine and the United States will work on the provisions of the plan to end the war. We are ready for constructive, honest, and swift work. And then I also informed him separately about Russia's horrific strike on Ternopil and the KHA-101 missile that the Russian army used yesterday to hit an ordinary residential building. They're hitting residential building, hospitals, everywhere. Yet why are there such few civilian casualties? And then it says. So that goes on there. And then peace is needed, and we appreciate the efforts of President Trump and his team aimed at restoring security in Europe. Ukraine defends lives and independence thanks to the courage of our people, our unity within the state, and the assistance from our partners. And then Axios, later today, released another story based on this meeting with Driscoll and Zelensky, and Zelensky's tweet. So Zelensky agrees to negotiate on Trump's peace plan for Ukraine, and then it says Zelensky told U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll that he's willing to work with the Trump administration on its new plan, and then the plan calls on Ukraine to make enormous concessions, including handing over territory. But rather than reject it outright, Zelensky agreed to negotiate, and his office said he expects to discuss it with President Trump in the coming days. And then Driscoll presented Zelensky with a written copy of the plan. A U.S. official said Zelensky and Driscoll agreed on an aggressive timeline for signature. Zelensky's office said in a statement that the Ukrainian president outlined fundamental principles that matter to our people and Following today's meeting, the parties agreed to work on the plan's provisions in a way that would bring about a just end to the war. And then Zelensky later tweeted that Ukraine was ready for constructive, honest work. And then Driscoll's delegation originally planned to travel to Ukraine to discuss military technology and strategy before the White House asked him to help kickstart negotiations with Zelensky. And then another piece of interesting news is that Keith Kellogg, who seemed to have didn't hasn't been doing anything very much other than holding Zelensky's hand and reassuring him at every moment that Trump is with Zelensky. But apparently, he's leaving his post in January. Keith Kellogg has told associates he plans to leave the administration, and departure that would mean the loss of a key advocate for Ukraine in the Trump administration. Now, his departure will be unwelcome news in Kiev. The retired lieutenant general was widely viewed by European diplomats as a sympathetic ear in an administration that has at times leaned towards Moscow's view on the origins of the war in Ukraine. And here is The Economist. The Economist, of course, as you know, has never seen any conflict that it doesn't want to exacerbate and doesn't want Western intervention in. I know some people may remember back in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and there was some debate really within the United States whether the United States should go to war against Iraq on behalf of Kuwait. And of course, The Economist, boom, absolutely, we got to go to, absolutely go to war against Iraq. This is the most heinous, horrible, terrible, thing that has ever happened. Not since the World War II has a flagrant act of aggression been committed. Iraq invading Kuwait. That was in August 1990. And Pat Buchanan Pat Buchanan. Then that was when he first began carving out his position as the non-interventionist, and he said, "Hey, it's not going to be the boys from The Economist who are going to be marching on that dusty road to Baghdad. It'll be men with the names like McAllister, Gonzalez, and Murphy, I think, and Murphy and Leroy Brown, something like that." Later on, he wrote another column in which he said the only people who are calling for this war against Iraq, this is Gulf War I, the only people who are calling for it are Henry Kissinger, Norman Podhoretz, and I think Richard Pearl. And what happened then was that these two columns were kind of these two sentences from two different columns were combined together, in which he said that the people calling for this war have names like Henry Kissinger, Norman Podhoretz, and Richard Pearl. But the people who are going to be marching to Baghdad have names like Gonzalez, Leroy Brown, Murphy, and whatever. And that was supposedly proof positive that Trump was, of course, anti-Semitic, because what he's saying is that there's prominent Jews are calling for this war. They're the only ones calling for this war, but the people who are actually going to be doing the dying are non-Jews. These are all non-Jewish names, and so that was put. But it was a very dishonest. I wrote about this, long time ago, about that the very dishonesty of this, because this was then used to show that Pat Buchanan was anti-Semitic. That's what he was just saying. Hey, the Jews are behind the war, but the people who are going to be doing the dying are all non-Jews. And so, this is the usual canard, the anti-Semitic canard. The Jews start wars, but it's the non-Jews who have to do the dying. So that was in 1990. But it was The Economist. What he was saying is that it's not going to be the boys from The Economist who are going to be doing the dying, and it never is. But throughout, ever since then and before, The Economist has always been calling for war. It wanted to bomb Milosevic. It, of course, was very, very gung ho about Gulf War II, the invasion of Iraq. And then, of course, it was gung ho about Libya and so on. So, naturally, of course, The Economist is an absolute fury at this Trump plan, supposed Trump plan. No one's actually ever even seen it. I mean, this is all of this is just simply speculation. But here is the spluttering, blustering, hysterical editorial from the Economist, and this is. A terrible American Russian proposal to end the war in Ukraine. Steve Witkoff's peace deal looks like a Russian wish list, and Ukraine is not biting. A peculiar new American Russian plan. Hey, it's not peculiar and it's not new. And we've known that this is going to be something like this is going to be the outline of any kind of a deal. It's similar to the deal that was discussed in Istanbul in the spring of 2022. It was similar to what was discussed in Anchorage. And, obviously, this is the only kind of a deal that could work. I mean, Russians are making some concessions. I mean, it's not true to say, as that the Kaya Kallas saying, oh, the Russians aren't making concessions. I mean, if that's and it looked like in Anchorage and here that Russia is accepting that, that there would be a ceasefire along the lines of contact in Kherson and Zaporozhye. So even though Kherson and Zaporozhye have been declared to be integral parts of the Russian Federation, they will accept that that Kherson and Zaporozhye are not fully under Russian control. But they will have the Donbass, and of course they have talked about the issue of Russian as an official language, and of course about the state of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. So to say, oh, it's something new, well, it's not new. It's been discussed over and over again, and we know that if you want this war to end, if you want the Russians to stop, they're not going to stop by sanctions. Sanctions are not going to stop Russia. The notion that somehow, if we only send this particular weapon system, or if we sanction this or we sanction that, it's going to bring Putin to the negotiating. No. So, if you want this war to end, you're going to have to work out a deal, something along these lines. I mean, it's obvious it's going to be something along those lines because that's been under discussion since 2022. So just as he's grappling with the corruption scandal that marks his gravest crisis since the invasion, the plan drafted without Ukraine's knowledge by Donald Trump's special representative Steve Witkoff and Putin's envoy Kirill Dmitriev appears to be a little short of a demand for capitulation. Sources familiar with the document say it checks off many of the maximalist demands familiar from earlier Russian proposals. So therefore, why say it's peculiar and it's new? You say they're familiar from earlier Russian proposals. And then the plan, they say, is a 28-point document aimed largely at curbing Ukraine's military power once the war ends, which we already know. We know that was the agreement that they came close to signing in Istanbul in April of 2022 before Boris Johnson's intervention, in which, absolutely, there was to be a curbing of Ukraine's military power. And then it envisages a reduction in the number of Ukrainian troops to just 40% of the current level, with no corresponding cut on the Russian side. No. Ukraine would be required to cede yet more territory and it would be barred from possessing several classes of weapons, including long range systems capable of reaching Moscow and St. Petersburg. Yeah, that would be an issue that they no long range weapons, and then no foreign troops would be allowed on Ukrainian soil. Planes used by foreign diplomats would be prohibited from flying to Ukraine, raising questions as to Russia's intentions for Ukrainian airspace. Ukraine will also be required to designate Russian as a second state language, and the local branch of the Russian Orthodox Church disbanded over Ukrainian charges that it is a tool of Kremlin propaganda, and espionage would be restored. So that that's so they just simply say, well, the Russian Orthodox Church obviously is just a tool of Kremlin propaganda. This is said by people who don't give a rat's ass about religion, the church, Russian Orthodox Church. And oh, it's just a tool of Kremlin propaganda. Um, the demands are far fetched. They're not far fetched. Ukrainians see most of them as non starters. The country's forces have been battered on the battlefield lately, but Russia has not achieved a serious operational breakthrough since 2022. Military analysts do not see Ukraine's position as being so desperate that Mr. Zelensky would need to agree to such punishing terms. So, in other words, we need to continue with this war. We need to just keep going. With a view to what? What's the end game here? Because then you say, okay, so the situation is not desperate, so therefore we can keep this war going. Make sure that more Ukrainians die. Well, if you say, well, what's the end game here? Then everyone knows perfectly well that Ukraine cannot win this war against Russia. So we've got to keep it going. That Ukraine's not going to win this war against Russia. That's one thing. We can also say Putin is not going to be pushed to the negotiating table. You can sanction this, you can't sanction that. That's just not in the Russian DNA. Basically, they're not. Oh well, that's a sanction. That's one sanction that I can't really take. The sanctions haven't really been that terrible. But even if they got really nasty, even if the sanctions really, after a while, they got made life more and more difficult for the Russians, it still isn't going to. It's not going to have that effect on them. So what's the end game here? Well, the end game is, of course, to provoke a serious war, and that means to push the United States into a serious war against Russia. That's the goal here. The longer this goes on, the more likely is it that America will eventually be pushed into this war on behalf of Ukraine, on behalf of the EU, to war against Russia. That's the strategy. That's the strategy of Zelensky. That's the strategy of Kaya Kallas. And that's why they go out of their way, however much it pains them, to be constantly very fulsome in talking about Donald Trump. Oh, well, we're really happy with, Trump is really doing great work. He's we're very happy with his peace initiatives. That's. But ultimately, what the Europeans are doing, and however much we detest these figures, these Kaya Kallas and Macron and Schmerz and Keir Starmer, they're not wholly stupid in their calculations. They're looking at the polls, and they see that Trump did poorly in the off-year elections in the beginning of this month. It was a very poor result. Trump's poll numbers are sinking. It's clearly underwater in the polls, and he's got the midterms next November. That's 12 months' time. So their calculation is, well, if we can get through the next 12 months, if we can just keep this war going for 12 months, that's the importance of why they're so desperate to get their hands on that 140 billion euros that are lying in Euroclear in Belgium. If we can get our hands on that 140 billion euros, we can keep, Ukraine going. We can keep this war going until the midterms. Now, what happens at the midterms? Their calculation is, and it's a reasonable one, because the polls are indicating that Trump is going to do poorly in the midterms. From that moment on, I mean, the House will obviously go to the Democrats. The House immediately, the first order of business when the Democrats retake the House is to impeach Trump. And they're going to be impeaching him on, lots and lots of different issues. It's quite possible that the Senate could also go to the Democrats. But then what happens then once they start impeaching is that Trump's energies will be very much diverted by fighting off. He's going to need all his lawyers around him. He's going to be fighting off this impeachment. There's a lot of energy is going to be devoted to fighting off all these Democrat charges. Now, if once Trump is underwater, they calculate that he's going to try and find some way to work with the Democrats, and the Democrats are obviously they are the Ukrainians' biggest friend in Washington. They're also NATO's biggest friend. So they figure that Trump, after next November, will have every incentive to pursue a much more belligerently anti-Russian policy than he has pursued so far. So that's their calculation. It's not an unreasonable calculation. So that's why when the economists said, "Well, the situation is not that bad," not really desperate. Well, just how many people are dying? I mean, the whole just not desperate. I mean, just how many are dying? And your plan is that they should go on dying, because you can say, all right, Russia is making slow progress. I mean, no question that is true. On the other hand, Ukraine isn't making any progress, because in September 2022, Ukraine launched the offensive, which was actually quite a successful offensive. There was an offensive in Kherson, the offensive in Kharkov, and they were quite successful offensives. So that was in September 2022. They tried another offensive in 2023 in Zaporozhye. That failed, and that's about it. So Ukraine hasn't mounted any offensives. They did invade Kursk in 2024, but that wouldn't really seem to accomplish anything very much for Ukraine. Somebody says impeachment will never pass the Senate. This is you're kind of missing the point. Of course, it won't pass the Senate. However, it's still a huge undertaking, because the administration is going to have to devote all of its resources to fighting off the charges. That's what Trump had to do twice. He did it twice during his first term, and it was a major undertaking. It's whether it passes the Senate or not is not really the issue. The issue is that you're going to have to devote your energies to this, because not only are the Democrats going to do this, and they're going to mount quite a formidable case against Trump, but they're going to have all the media on their side. So Trump will have every incentive That's how the Europeans figure. He will have every incentive to try to placate the Democrats and try to placate the Republicans in the Senate on whom he will rely to survive. Remember, um, let's say if the Democrats do take the Senate, let's say they take the Senate. Let's say it's 50-50. 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. Every single Democrat is going to vote to convict Trump. That's 50. That's 50 votes already in the bag. Um, that means there's only 17 votes that they need from the Republicans. They're not going to get those 17 votes, but it's not a foregone conclusion. There are plenty of Senate Republicans who hate Trump, and so therefore Trump will have every reason to try to placate and please the Republicans who are no great fans of his. All the various Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. I think Mitch McConnell will still be there. I can't remember whether maybe that's Mitch McConnell will be out. Then so there will be those Roger Wicker, the real Russia hawks, and of course Lindsey Graham himself. The Russia hawks. The Russia hawks are really then going to apply the pressure on Trump. Hey, you want to vote to avoid conviction? You gotta do a little bit more for Ukraine. So that's the calculation. It's not an unreasonable calculation on the Europeans' part. So all they have to do is to keep this war going for another 12 months. Another 12 months, and the political situation in Washington may be favorable to them, because basically the Europeans and Zelensky and others, they're aligned with the Democratic Party. They were the Democrats. Came as a shock to them. Trump won, so they're aligned with the Democrats, and so they're looking forward to the Democrats being able to wield power again in Washington. So that's the calculation that they're making now. So that's the calculation. The Economist doesn't say it, but when the Economist suggests, well, let's just keep this going. Let's keep it going for a little bit longer. Then think, okay, well, what are you figuring out? The tide of the war is going to shift in Ukraine's direction? No, of course it's not. As I said, Ukraine hasn't been able to achieve any military victories really since September 2022. So that's 3 years now since they've done that. So the war isn't going to move in Ukraine's direction. They don't have the manpower. They don't have resources. It can't. It's not going to move in their direction. Putin is not going to accept terms that the Economist suggests. I mean, it's nonsensical. So what's the plan? The plan is, let's trigger this a war. Let's get Trump on board. Anyway, let's just go on a little bit more with this Economist fuming editorial. And it says, it's unclear how widely the proposal was circulated within the Trump administration, or whether it was chiefly a personal initiative by Mr. Witkoff. Some sources suggest the latter. The State Department has declined to comment on it. It's also not obvious what the aim of devising such a plan might be beyond embarrassing Mr. Zelensky at his moment of weakness. Sources close to the Ukrainian presidential office fear the timing suggests that some in America are using the corruption crisis to push Ukraine into unreasonable concessions. And then Ukraine first learned the details during a meeting in Miami between Witkoff and Umerov and so on. And then they go on. On November 20th, Mr. Zelensky is due to face an angry meeting of his party. So this is, they're picking on him at his moment of weakness. And now here is the Telegraph France brands US Russia peace deal a capitulation. Europe denounces a 28-point plan that would require Zelensky to give up Donbass. And then Jean Noel Barrot, France's foreign minister, said peace cannot mean capitulation. We do not want the capitulation of Ukraine. Several European leaders hit out at the plans, which were negotiated in secret over the last few weeks. And then Ukraine would be permitted. And then again, we have the Telegraph. But here, when it says, commenting on the deal on Wednesday morning, Muscala said, what we Europeans have always supported is a long-lasting and just peace. We welcome any efforts to achieve that. And we are the Europeans. So, and then Barrot says discussions are needed for us to reach a just and durable peace in Ukraine. They should start with a ceasefire on the contact line that allows for orderly discussion on the question of territories and security. They start this absolute nonsense. You say this nonsense. Oh, well, there's a ceasefire, and then we just sort of pour arms into Ukraine and then get ready to resume the war in 5 years' time. And then his German counterpart, Johann Wadefull, echoed that sentiment, saying it was a prerequisite for any negotiations that Russia agreed to a truce without any. What absolute! It's a prerequisite for any negotiations that Russia agreed to a truce without any conditions. So essentially, it's actually a Russia precondition of any negotiations. So Russia just give up. Russia give up, and then we basically then we get free reign to do whatever we want, and then hey, nothing's going to happen with these negotiations. It's like the Minsk negotiations, which went on from 2014, 2015 through to 2022 and going nowhere. And that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going nowhere. We'll postpone the negotiations and then postpone them again and postpone them. And then in the meantime, NATO will entrench itself ever more inside Ukraine. That's the plan. Oh, well, it's a condition of any that there should be an unconditional truce. Since when? When was that ever the case? It's never happened. All negotiations to end a war continued while the war was going on. The Vietnam War, the Paris peace talks, they began in 1968 and then finally concluded in January 1973. So it basically went on for 5 years, the Paris peace talks. There was no ceasefire. No one said, oh, we need a ceasefire in Vietnam for the Paris peace talks to succeed. There was no ceasefire. And no one expected that to be a ceasefire. But but that doesn't stop negotiations on the basis of a final outcome. So the Europeans are lying once again. They always do this, and thinking that the public in Europe is so stupid that they're going to buy into it. Oh yeah. Well, of course, yeah. We need a ceasefire. We can't possibly have any kind of peace negotiations without a ceasefire. I mean that's a given. Yeah, we need a ceasefire right now. And then in the meantime, we've got Poland, which is still very, very indignant um, about the train, the whatever explosion on a railway track. This was apparently a horrific and never before seen terrorist attack. Now, repairing railway tracks is about the easiest thing you can do. I mean, everyone's always known that you bomb a railway track, it's completely pointless because railway tracks are always very easy to repair. It's just not going to damage anything. But the Poles, or the Polish government, is pretending to be horrified, outraged. It's because of this terrible terrorist act that, of course, Russia is behind. This is the same Polish government, the same dishonest crowd. Donald Tusk, Prime Minister, Radek Sikorski, the foreign minister. It's amazing you have a foreign minister of Poland, Radek Sikorski. Radek Sikorski is MI6. He always was MI6. He came as a young man to Oxford. Clearly was recruited by MI6. I mean, I remember when he was sort of hanging around in London with these various kind of neoconservative circles um, in, uh, in the UK, getting himself all kinds of various gigs, and then he went to Afghanistan supposedly to report about the glories of the Mujahideen. And then he kind of got some journalistic gigs, very shady journalistic gigs. He didn't really produce anything very much, but he got, he's a roving correspondent. I remember when he was the roving correspondent of National Review magazine. And so he's a foreign minister of Poland. So he's not pursuing in any way the national interests of Poland. Not in the slightest. I mean, he is MI6. He's always pursued the interests of other powers than Poland's. I mean, how has he done anything at all to make life better for Poles? But anyway, so Radek Sikorski and Donald Tusk were, Sikorsky. Remember, he was celebrating the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline back in September 2022. When he sent out that famous tweet, "Thank you, USA." Um, and then of course recently when the Polish government said no, 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 we're not handing over any Ukrainian suspects to Germany because these Ukrainians did a wonderful thing in blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, even though this is somebody else's property. This is somebody has invested money in building the pipeline, and so they're out of pocket. And then of course they're going to lose a great deal of their investment. But I said, oh, that's fine. As long as you're blowing up something in Europe that helps Russia, then that's justifiable. And of course, Sikorsky then threatened Hungary and said, hey, nice refineries you've got in Hungary. Be ashamed if something happened to them after those refineries are refining Russian crude, and Russian crude is helping the Russian economy. So, that's be a shame if something happened to those refineries. So there they were, gloating and espousing terrorism anywhere in Europe to destroy anything that might happen, that might hurt Russia. And now they're suddenly so upset about an attack on a railway track, which even by their own admission, this railway track was being used for Poland to ship arms into Ukraine, and where it would be used to kill Russians. So clearly, I mean, if ever there was a legitimate target, then that railway track was a legitimate target. And to be honest, from the pictures that I've seen, I haven't seen that there was a great deal of damage. I mean, with all these photographs of Tusk looking very grim, but the pictures of the railway track, I say, where's the damage? This is going to take about an afternoon to repair. But anyway, Poland is still getting very, very indignant about the railway track, and they've now, as you might have expected, they're taking retaliatory measures, and they intend to take further retaliatory measures. And so here's the Guardian. It says Poland closes last Russian consulate after act of state terrorism on railway. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing that within 3 days they were able to establish that it was an act of state terrorism on Russia's part, even though, and we discussed this on Tuesday, that they say that the 2 Ukrainians were behind this. 2 Ukrainians who supposedly escaped to Belarus. So no one interviewed them, no one arrested them. but they already know that the Russians were behind this as an act of state terrorism. Foreign minister orders closure of Gdansk consulate and says 4 people now arrested after sabotage attack. So that's very interesting because they said the other day it was just these 2 Ukrainians, but now 4 people have been arrested. So Poland's foreign minister Radzisz Sikorski has described last weekend's sabotage attack on Poland's rail system as an act of state terrorism ordered by Russia as he announced that Poland was closing the last remaining Russian consulate in the country. The clear intention was to cause human casualties, he said of the weekend bomb attack. Now, what kind of a stupid thing is that to say? Because let's say the Russians were behind this, then you say, no, the clear intention was to sabotage the Poland to Ukraine pipeline, that they wanted to sabotage the rail link that was helping to deliver NATO weaponry into Ukraine. I mean, it's not human casualties. I mean, that's a complete nonsense. What would be the point of human casualties? This is a strategic railway line. So it absolutely, this would be a legitimate target. If Poland's going to go around threatening to destroy oil refineries, then boy, I think there's a perfectly legitimate to start destroying railway lines that deliver weapons to Kiev. But so, the clear intention was to cause human casualties. The Polish security services said they were in the process of arresting several people linked to the incident. They are on the trail of the principals. They are on the trail of the perpetrators. The first arrests are now taking place, the spokesperson Jacek Dobrzyński said on Wednesday. He said later that 4 people had been arrested. You kind of wonder, who are these 4 people? So, I mean, that's, yeah. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister Donald Tusk said authorities had identified 2 Ukrainian citizens involved in the attack who had arrived in Poland from Belarus and left soon after, placing explosive devices on the rail tracks over the weekend. Tusk said Poland believed the men were cooperating with Russia's security services, and one had been arrested previously for sabotage in Ukraine. The pair are reportedly not among those who have been arrested. And then Sikorski said he was ordering the closure of the Gdansk consulate, though it will not be our full response to the attack. He did not specify what other measures Poland might take. Poland has closed 2 other Russian consulates in Krakow and Poznan in recent years, but the embassy in Warsaw remains open. Russia's foreign minister said he would reduce Poland's diplomatic and consular presence in Russia in response. And then Tusk spoke with Zelensky on Wednesday morning, with the Ukrainian president promising to share all information relating to the attack. The 2 countries would set up a bilateral working group to try to prevent further incidents. And this was Zelensky said, our information is the same. All the facts indicate that there is a Russian trace behind all of this, he said. I think the he said, this is very poorly written. The he is referring to Tusk rather than to Zelensky. This is what happens when, you have illiterates writing, you have 2 antecedents, Tusk and Zelensky, and then they say he. So who's the he? But anyway, he compared the attacks in Poland to daily sabotage attacks in Ukraine. The reason I say, because that quote about the Russian trace behind this that was Tusk. Tusk has been quoted as saying that. Speaking at a press conference in Warsaw, the chief of the Polish General Staff, Wiesław Kukula, said the long winter nights in the upcoming holiday season could be perceived by Russia as the perfect time to increase sabotage activity. We must not allow this to happen. So the long winter nights, upcoming holiday season. So because what do Russians want to do? The Russians, they want to sabotage Poland's Christmas. The Grinch at Christmas. They want to sabotage, long winter nights, upcoming holiday season, when you're supposed to be, spending your time with your family and sharing presents, drinking grog, eggnog, but the Russians are busy sabotaging. Kukula added that the army wanted to prepare for a wide range of potential incidents to eliminate any space for this type of activity. And then the defense minister, this is Vladislav Koshinyak Kamish, announced at the same press conference that the army was working on a plan, Operation Horizon. So they've already got a plan. They've got the plan has a name, to deploy 10,000 soldiers to protect critical infrastructure across the country to counteract acts of diversion and raise the levels of security for Polish citizens. 10,000 soldiers deployed around the country. That's quite a response for some kind of a sabotage, and I haven't even seen any evidence that there was anything much by way of sabotage. Um, so this is the Poland, but the reason I bring that up is that this is the language of the Europeans. I mean, the Europeans are absolutely determined to provoke this war. I mean, this whole thing in Poland is clearly all geared, whether it's false flag or whatever, to whip up this hysteria about Russia. So we have to get ready. 10,000 troops are to be deployed throughout Poland to protect Poland's infrastructure. Um, and just in case you haven't quite got the message, then here is uh, this new thing that the Europeans are on, is this military Schengen. The whole idea, this idea of this military Schengen is that there should be no barriers, no restrictions at all on military deployments in Europe and military transport in Europe. So that's the military Schengen. That is free motion of military hardware across the continent. So that's the military Schengen plan, and the European Commission announced this. I think the other day. Here it is. Commission moves towards military Schengen and transformation of defense industry. And then to make it easier for troops, equipment, and military assets to move quickly and smoothly across Europe, the European Commission and the High Representative step up defense readiness, focusing on preparedness with a military mobility package. New regulation, military mobility, and joint communication. The Commission also aims at boosting disruptive innovation in the military area and strengthening Europeans' defense industry. And then this is the plan, creating an EU-wide military mobility area by 2027. That's very soon. EU-wide military mobility area. The military mobility package brings the EU one step closer towards a military Schengen. It will make it faster, safer, and more coordinated to move troops and military equipment across Europe, just so long as it's safe. I mean, that's what I'm really happy with. It's entirely safe to move troops and military equipment across Europe, whether European countries want it or not. That's the whole point of the military Schengen. European countries are not going to be able to say no, to refuse their territory to be used to transport military hardware. That's the whole point of the Schengen. There'll be no nation states are not going to have any say at all in what gets driven across their territory. So it says removing regulatory barriers and creating an emergency framework and enhancing the resilience of transport infrastructure, pooling and sharing capabilities, and so on. And and of course, there's Kaya Kallas. The fast movement of Europe's militaries is essential for Europe's defense. Defense readiness fundamentally depends on whether you can get your tanks and troops to where you need them. Yeah, we got to get our tanks, troops where we need them, when you need them. And Today we are proposing an emergency system for cross border military transport and an initiative to pool member countries' transport to make moving troops easier across the continent. Europe is facing unprecedented security threats. The case for better military mobility couldn't be clearer. And The Guardian, I think, picks up on this and makes clear, when you get away from all this EU verbiage, it says plan to speed tanks and armies across Europe in case of war with Russia. That's it. Don't free yourself from all the Euro babble. They're preparing for war with Russia. European Commission seeks to ease rules on cross-border movement to create a military Schengen zone. A military mobility plan announced by the European Commission on Wednesday is part of an effort to ensure Europe is ready to defend itself by 2030, in line with warnings from security services that Russia could be able to attack an EU member state within 5 years. So, whenever you do these things, everyone always justifies this as defensive. But this is, of course, aggressive. This is a preparation for a war. Just because you say it's defensive doesn't mean anyone else is going to take it seriously. You are preparing for war. And you can say, oh, it's because we're afraid of Russia. Russia's going to attack us. If you're afraid of Russia's going to attack us, why not bring this Ukraine war to an end now? If an army sought today to move from Western European port to the EU's eastern border with Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, it would encounter significant obstacles and delays, say EU officials. Why are you moving your forces there? I thought you're just being defensive. I mean, if you're going to be defensive, don't you want to stay put and defend your territory? Why are you moving your borders, your troops, your tanks, and everything to your border with Russia? They point to bridges that cannot bear the weight of tanks, railway tunnels that are too small, and track gauges too narrow to accommodate military vehicles, as well as EU paperwork on working time at customs. At least one EU member state requires 45 days' notice for cross border troop movements, in contrast to the objective of a 3-day border procedure pledged by the EU countries in 2024. According to the EU's auditors, another unnamed member state once denied entry to a convoy of tanks because they violated weight limits on local road traffic laws. So forget about denying entry to a convoy of tanks. So you say, I don't want any convoys of tanks going through my country. Well, tough luck, buddy. You've signed on to this. That's where this heading. So given all these preparations, of course, the last thing they want is any kind of a deal on Ukraine. So we have a track record. We saw what happened. Boris Johnson and Biden administration, they stopped in its tracks a possible deal in April 2022. We obviously saw what happened with Minsk. They made sure that Minsk never was implemented, and of course we saw what happened with after Anchorage, and so now once again, Europe goes into action to prevent any kind of a deal. I have to believe that probably it will prevail. Probably the Europeans will prevail. I mean, unless Trump really puts all of the weight of the administration behind um, uh, the behind the this plan, then it's not going to go anywhere. absolutely was just going to go nowhere. There's going to be more of these meetings, and then Starmer is going to get on the phone to Trump, and then Merz is going to get on the phone, Macron, and nothing's going to happen. And that I kind of feel that that's probably how it's going to end up. Anyway, let's now take a look at our the our locals board. These are the gagglers, the people who make sure that the dogs who are doing all the heavy lifting, they're doing all the heavy lifting. They feel unappreciated. They feel unrewarded and unremunerated, and so it's always very very generous on the part of the gagglers that they say, well, we've got to do something for these dogs. I mean, they're so unhappy, they're so unappreciated. So thank you everybody who uh, ask questions and raise, and above all, who um, uh, this. So I have to ask. I saw Steve K9 says about apropos of my comment about Pat Buchanan, and he says they may have spliced Buchanan's comments together, but I bet that is exactly what he thought, and why not? It made perfect sense. Yeah, I think I, I think that's a reasonable inference. I mean that's probably what Buchanan meant. However, Buchanan was a very shrewd um, player. I mean, and he knew that if he were to write that sentence, just combine the two, name Kissinger, Richard Pearl, Norman Podhoretz, and then you say, well, they're the only ones who want this war, and but the people who are going to be dying, people with names like Leroy Brown, um, McAllister, and Gonzalez. Um, then yeah, he would know. Now they're going to nail you, for anti-Semitism. That when that if you go back to that time, the early 1990s, when the whole anti-Pat Buchanan movement really got off the ground, that sentence was used constantly against him, and it was repeated again and again and again. And then so I wrote this column saying, hey, this is dishonest. You're putting together with a bit of one sentence from one column, and then in the part of a sentence from another column, you splice them together to create an image of Buchanan that is very unfair. Now, would he have agreed? Yeah, he might have agreed. He might have agreed in private, but nonetheless, I don't think you should hold against people what they might say in private. In public, he didn't do that. And but they continued to do it. And so even when I pointed that out, people still went on quoting that. It's a little like Russiagate. I mean, no matter how many times you point out that there's no evidence that the Russians did anything at all to help Trump. There's no evidence of collusion between Trump and Putin. People will still go on repeating how Russia interfered in the 2016 election to secure a win for Trump. So that was the same thing. It was always held against Buchanan. Buchanan never really recovered from that. I mean, the onslaught against him was quite ferocious, and he never really recovered from that. Of course, at that time it was a different media environment, 92, 96, and the neocons dominated the, the media pages, and particularly within the conservative um, media space, because remember that was so Commentary magazine was still very influential, and they ran a big article, Pat Buchanan and the Jews. It was written by Joshua Muravchik. That was in for the 1992 election. Of course, that the splicing those two comments together was really the prize exhibit proving that Buchanan was anti-Semitic. And then there was, of course, William Buckley when he wrote "In Search of Anti-Semitism," where he kind of suggested that Buchanan was anti-Semitic, and then, of course, you had the Weekly Standard, launched by Rupert Murdoch, completely run by, the neocons, Bill Kristol and John Podhoretz. They all attacked Buchanan. I mean, you can't do that today. I think the media environment is very different. So that's why the attempt that Mark Levin has attempted to the attempt of Mark Levin to destroy Tucker Carlson is just not working. I mean, that could have worked 30 years ago as it worked against Pat Buchanan, but it just isn't going to work now. Anyway, Danaki, always good to see you. Dear George, I think Jose Nino put it best when he said that Trump's actual constituency is Jewish billionaire criminals. I might add that the more Jewish and the more billionaire, the better. Well, it's an interesting issue because I mean, yes, he has these the various Jewish billionaires that surround him. However, he has he has got some kind of a deal on Gaza, and he's gone much further than anyone had expected. I mean, they've got to the stage of a UN Security Council resolution. Now, you can always say, oh, yeah, but Israel will, of course, ignore it, and then Israel will just continue doing whatever it's doing, and that may be true. But nonetheless, he has basically internationalized that war in Gaza. He's got, in theory, other states involved in Gaza. I mean, he's got this board of peace, which, in theory, there'll be other countries signing on, and he's got this international security force that, in theory, hasn't been actualized yet, but in theory, there will be other countries providing force. Now, that cannot really be very satisfactory for Israel. The people have been saying, "Oh well, of course, Israel intends to depopulate Gaza, intends to ethnically cleanse Gaza, throw out 2 million people." We've been told this over and over again that they were going to do it. Well, if that is Israel's plan, then that's going to be awfully hard to pull that off now. I mean, there's a UN Security Council resolution in place. You've internationalized Gaza. It's going to be awfully hard to start pushing out 2 million people. I don't know how it can be done. So you kind of have to acknowledge reality. You can't just sort of be like this the sort of the permanent naysayers who say, "Oh well, of course Israel is just going to drive out all the Palestinians. Oh yes, of course it's just a matter of time." Well, how are they going to do that? I mean, so given the internationalization of the conflict, given essentially Trump is president of the Board of Peace, and there are going to be others involved, and then other Arab states are going to provide some force. So now implementing this deal, that's going to be a problem. But you can't just simply say, "Oh well, of course it's just Israel is just going to drive out the 2 million Palestinians from Gaza." They couldn't do it after October the 7th. They couldn't do it then. They had 2 years in which to do it, from October the 7th, 2023, through to October whatever, or early October of 2025. They couldn't do it. Well, if they couldn't do it then, they're not going to be able to do it now. Now that others are involved. So, Trump has done this. Now we have to see, and then the Jewish billionaires, the Zionist billionaires, or whatever. I don't think they're very happy about this. But there's not really a great deal that they can do about it. I think Trump accomplished this because he did apply pressure against Netanyahu. Now, that doesn't mean that the Israelis are not going to resist this and they can fight against this and so on. You know, they're very wily. They've always been very wily customers. But nonetheless, this you know you know this is obviously not exactly the satisfactory outcome that these Zionist billionaires were looking to. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of we should follow that this deal on Gaza. I don't think it's at all what Israel would have wanted, but they felt that they had to do it because Trump insisted that they do it. But we'll have to see how it progresses. But so far, it's it's moved in a direction that Israel cannot be happy with. The UN Security Council resolution, they hate that kind of thing. Um, and it was supported even by the Palestinian Authority. It was supported by all of the Arab states. So all of the Arab states support this. So gonna be hard for Israel to resist this. Anyway, Marty, always good to see you. Marty has presented, his a picture of Kaya Kallas with her hands before her face. That's a very interesting. What exactly is she doing there? It's kind of puzzling. Whenever people do that, they put their kind of hands before their mouth. What are they trying to convey by doing that? Maloney did some of that when she was at Sharm el Sheikh at the big signing of that the pledge, the Sharm el Sheikh pledge, and she was there, and she was standing also with her hand in front of her mouth, and people speculated that the reason she was doing that was that she's a heavy smoker, and I think Erdogan made a comment about her smoking, disapproving of her practice, and so people said, "Oh, she's somehow become very self-conscious about being a smoker, and that she smells of cigarettes." And so that was the thing, Maloney. Um, uh, what Kaya Kallas is doing there, I don't know. It's not a very I don't know. It's not exactly a very flattering image. Anyway, thank you so much as always, Marty. Thank you for all of your hilarious postings. Always a delight to go through them with us. You know, from you always manage to dig up something funny and entertaining from way back when. So thank you so much, Marty. So Marty has the caption on that photo. Oh no, I've worn this outfit before. Well, yeah, possible. Or yeah, I've worn this outfit before. Or oh no, Ursula von der Leyen is very. You don't know. Well, that's not really. Ursula von der Leyen doesn't wear outfits like that. Yeah, I've worn this outfit before. I don't know. That's exactly. Um, I would more caption that. Um, yeah. More like she's hey, I should have cleaned this outfit. I don't think this outfit is um, very. I don't think it smells very fresh. That'd be more something along those lines. Very unflattering. Yeah, I don't think this outfit smells very fresh. Even I can smell the stale perfume. Some I put that's the kind of caption I put on. But anyway, thank you, Marty. Robert, always good to see you, Robert. And kind of interested in in developments in New Jersey, but always glad for that. And then Robert says, on yesterday's podcast, Dr. Rose said Russia would use tactical nukes if NATO attacked it, directly in keeping with long-standing Russian doctrine. The question is, do Europe's ruling elites truly doubt this, or are they merely pretending to? See, I think that's very, you know, I you're right. Dr. Rose said something like that, but it seems to go against other things that Dr. Rose said, with which I had agreed, and Dr. Rose had said, and that's why what I agreed with is that nuclear weapons are really quite useless. They're not much they they're effective. If you can, if you have a nuclear weapon, if you, a nuclear power up against a non-nuclear power, then you have overwhelming strength. But on the other hand, it's only ever happened once that a power with nuclear weapons used those nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear power, which is namely the United States and Japan, and that has incurred so much revulsion. It's 80 years later, it's still seen as a deeply immoral act against essentially a completely helpless population. So it's very difficult to think of it. But ultimately, if you have nuclear weapons and your adversary has nuclear weapons, then what do the nuclear weapons do for you? You use a nuclear weapon, then your adversary is going to use a nuclear weapon against you. So I think they're quite useless. And I think I was a little surprised when he said that, because in other podcasts he had said that actually nuclear weapons don't give you anything, and that real power these days is determined by your conventional strength. And I think that's right. It depends on your conventional strength, on that whether you can win using conventional weapons, because the nuclear weapons just invites retaliation from another nuclear power, and so therefore, you use a nuclear weapons against the Europeans, a nuclear weapon will be used against Russia, and that will lead to mass killing. So I don't think Russia is willing to use nuclear weapons. I think it's been clear. I mean, Putin has talked about, at least hinted about Russia's nuclear capability. The Europeans and the Americans haven't been impressed. And I think with some justification, because they don't think Russia will use the nuclear weapons. Russia has plenty of conventional firepower at its disposal, and it should be able to win wars against NATO or against Ukraine or whatever with its conventional firepower. Why resort to nuclear weapons, which is extremely uh, fraught thing to, because it invites retaliation. Again, nobody has done it. Nobody has used nuclear weapons since 1945. So I don't know. It makes very little sense. Now, what I thought was interesting in in, in what he said, because he the issue, I think, was because I think I raised the question. Look, the Europeans, whichever way this war ends in Ukraine, the Europeans are obviously on the road to mass mobilization. They're preparing for war. They're not prepared to work with Russia. They're not prepared to improve relations with Russia. Not prepared to do any kind of cooperation with Russia. Um, and so and then I thought that Dr. Rose suggested, well, then Russia has to make its position clear by this the threat of nuclear weapons and so on. Now, I think, as I said, I don't think a threat of nuclear weapons is any threat at all. Nobody believes you, and so it's a quite pointless action. But I think there still remains the question. I think the unanswered question is, once this war ends, essentially there's just going to be this, I know, a cold peace or whatever. I mean, it's going to be the way the Europeans are thinking. Like both sides, Russia and Europe, will be preparing for some conflict down the road. I do not see any sign that the Europeans are prepared to work at all with Russia. I mean, the level of the Russophobia is so intense. The hatred for Russia is so intense that that's not, you can't just get off that escalator. I mean, that, it's you're on that escalator ride, and it's very hard to stop. So, um, but so I don't quite see how what Russia can do to change the calculus of Europe's ruling elites. The only thing that might change that calculus is some kind of a crisis within Europe, bit of a political or economic crisis. Um, then and then they will have to address that the issue and say, forget it. But I don't know, whatever, like election victories in France by the National Rally, election victories with the Alternative for Deutschland, and they're not able to do anything about that. That might change the calculus. They might, or it might not. It's up in the air whether it would change the calculus. That's the only thing I can see that could change things. But for Russia to issue threats would only harden the division in Europe, would only harden the antagonism towards Russia and essentially a preparation for war. I mean, as went through that thing with the Poles and through that European Schengen, they are preparing for war. And they're not going to get off that by any Russian threats to use tactical nukes. So it's just that the preparation for war will only intensify. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. Anne Marie, always good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne Marie, as always. And as I said, Anne Marie is a renowned musician, distinguished expert on music, as a scholar of music, a practitioner of music. He has played in the best orchestras in the world, has performed with outstanding conductors and worked with outstanding composers. And we're very fortunate to have her here contributing to the Gaggle. And everything she writes is always extraordinarily intellectually stimulating. I'm not an expert the way she is, but she always writes something that stimulates me. And so she wrote recently something very interesting about Sibelius, and particularly the Sibelius Third Symphony, which we posted on the Gaggle Music Club. And then I felt compelled to respond to her comments. So you can find it on the Gaggles locals page, the Sibelius Third Symphony, and then read Anne Marie's really interesting, fascinating comments on Sibelius, and then my attempt to respond to Anne Marie. But as I said, I mean, we're just very fortunate to have a renowned musician among us, and particularly contributing and helping us to learn the intricacies of music. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. I really appreciate that. And then NKMRD says, good evening as well. The weather is as good as the news indeed. I think about hibernating until at least April. Well, it's a very interesting, because I do think that hibernation is a very useful think that animals do. I think it's something. It's a rejuvenating process, and I think humans um, should also think about that kind of thing of hey, just hibernation. I wouldn't mind, but for some reason we kind of live in these places where it's so miserable for so much of the year. I mean, it's like I mean, try to get yourself through. I don't know, October till April. That's a long time. I mean, that's a long, long time to get through. So, um, somebody so Schlum Bucket Return says it's bad enough we have to see and hear politicians. It's a good thing we don't have to smell them too. No, I think that's right. I don't know. It's like that's my speculation. I did that because people were saying this about Maloney as because she stood there for quite some time, and I noticed this, and others noticed it. Why is she standing there with her hand? It's a very odd thing to do. Just because she's standing, she stood right behind Trump at Sharm el Sheikh, and she just stood there with her hand in front of her mouth, and it was an odd gesture. I've never seen anyone do that, and then I think that's when the speculation arose that Erdogan just objected to her being such a heavy smoker. So that's why I speculated about the with Kaya Kalas. Think, oh God, I should have I should have thought of having a fresher smelling outfit to wear today. Um, and so there's everything else to do. Um, yeah. So I think we're in a situation, just to sum up, where that uh, this if Trump decides that he can do without the Europeans and that he's going to pursue this an agreement with Russia, and ignore Ukraine and ignore the Europeans, which was clearly his instinct initially when he opened the dialogue with Moscow, and then they had that meeting in Riyadh with Lavrov and Marco Rubio, and then because it seemed like he was trying to think in terms of a bilateral framework. If he pursues that and he says, I'm not going to allow the Europeans to push us off a track. I'm just going to pursue this, because Trump knows what the European game is. I mean, he'll go there. He sees Kaya Kallas. We know exactly what Kaya Kallas is up to, so Trump knows what Kaya Kallas is up to. We know what Radek Sikorsky is up to, so Trump knows what Radek Sikorsky. He knows what they're doing. He knows that their goal is to provoke a war between the United States and Russia. He knows this, and I think, is sufficiently rational that says I need to avoid that. So somebody said about apropos of the nuclear weapons, sell that to North Korea. You're absolutely right. That's what nuclear weapons are useful for. I didn't say they were wholly unuseful. They're not useful in fighting wars. That doesn't do it. But nuclear weapons absolutely are useful to prevent the invasion of your country. That's absolutely guaranteed. You cannot that if you have a nuclear weapon, you will not be invaded. And that's a use. But in terms of how you can get yourself into an advantageous position with nuclear weapons against an adversary who also has nuclear weapons, then I think that nuclear weapons are completely useless. They don't do anything. But absolutely, if you have nuclear weapons, you avoid invasion. And if you don't have nuclear weapons, then you're likely to get invaded. So Iraq did not have nuclear weapons; it got invaded. Um, Libya did not have nuclear weapons; it got bombed and bombed and bombed. Yugoslavia did not have nuclear weapons; it got bombed and bombed and bombed. So that's where I think nuclear weapons are quite useful as a kind of weapon of last resort. And I think that's its the purpose. It's a weapon of last resort. But it's useless as any way of fighting the war. But anyway, just to finish up, the key to any kind of a deal in the Middle East is if the United States is willing to apply serious pressure on Israel. If it isn't, then there's not going to be any kind of a deal. So the key to ending this war um, in Ukraine is if Trump goes ahead and says, I'm not going to involve the Europeans in all of this. I want to work something out. And then if the Europeans don't like it, Trump can say, okay, well, you go ahead. You go on fighting this war if you want, but include us out. So once he does that, he says, include us out, then you're not going to succeed in provoking this a shooting war between the United States and Russia. So that's it. Now we've already seen the massive onslaught on the part of the Europeans, on the part of the media. Oh my God, Munich. We're sending out. Ukraine is being sold out. That's entirely was to be predictable. Anyway, so on that note, thank you very much, everybody. Who? Oh, hold it. I think I missed something. Let me. I missed. God, wait. There was. Cynthia had asked a question, and I didn't see. Why? How come I didn't see it? I saw earlier. I got a. Where? Let's see. What's the problem here? I think. Let me. I'm gonna have to go. Yes. So for some reason, somehow something went wrong with my with the locals page. Yeah. So let me. Yeah. Okay. So I lost it. So Dale Owen says she tried to imitate Justin Trudeau, doesn't she? Similar mannerisms, similar cocky style. There's a certain even. Yeah. I didn't think of that. I can see your point. Yeah, I can see there's a certain resemblance there. Um, that's Justin Trudeau and Kaya Kallas. Absolutely insufferable. Also, more or less part of a kind of privileged elite. I mean, Justin Trudeau in his career entirely based on his on his father, who was kind of the most famous political figure in Canada, at least since the Second World War. So his meteoric rise within Canadian politics is entirely due to his father, and same thing goes for Kaya Kallas. I mean, she was saying. She came from the privilege of the USSR. Enjoyed the very nice life that very few people did actually enjoy in the USSR. But she came from the privileged USSR family in Estonia. Anyway, Cynthia says this apropos of the question that we had about Jose Nino and the Jewish billionaires. He says, and when any of these billionaires commit a crime, not just pedophilia or financial crimes, but even murder for that matter, they can always move to Israel to escape prosecution. So why didn't Epstein just move to Israel before he was sent to prison for his alleged crimes? At least in Israel, he would have remained a free man, unless, of course, he ended up being murdered by someone in the billionaire class for swindling or squealing on them. You know, that I wondered about that myself because Epstein had a lot of money at his disposal. The people at the time of his arrest, they found, what is it? How many passports did he have? He had passports, he had money, jewels in his home in Manhattan, and he had to have known that this was coming. And yet, I think he returned to the United States. He had been somewhere. I don't know. Maybe he was in actually Israel, but he returned to the United States. And I never understood why he did that. I imagine he had an Israeli passport. I mean, somebody like him would have an Israeli passport. So I don't know why he didn't do that. To be honest, I never exactly understood even why he would commit suicide. I mean, that, I haven't subscribed to the theory that he was murdered. No, no, because I think it's impossible. But I haven't seen any evidence that he was murdered. However, I don't get why he would commit suicide. He could again field a dream team of lawyers. I think the case against him probably wasn't terribly strong. Yeah, there was the Me Too hysteria, but he would still be able to field a formidable team of lawyers. I'm sure Alan Dershowitz would work for him. So his condition really wasn't that hopeless. I wouldn't have thought. And there are still questions. I mean, he had a non-prosecution agreement with the federal government. He signed that whenever it was 2008, 2009. So I'm not at all sure that the federal government can just simply bring charges against Epstein. I mean, I know the argument. They said, oh, well, there's a different jurisdiction or whatever. But I'm sure that he could put together lawyers who would say, no, you are violating the non-prosecution agreement. That's the whole point of a non-prosecution agreement, that you don't prosecute for essentially the same crimes, because it's not as though, if Epstein had committed additional crimes since the non-prosecution agreement, that would be different. But that's not what the indictment in 2019 was, going back years before that. I mean, it was still, they just said, oh, well, it's a different jurisdiction. That was for Florida. This is from New York. I'm not at all sure that would have worked. I mean, I think that prosecution agreement, I mean, why would anyone be stupid enough to sign a non-prosecution agreement? Oh, well, that only works in this jurisdiction, but it doesn't work in another jurisdiction. I mean, I'm sure his lawyers would not have fallen into that trap, just simply signing a non-prosecution agreement. So I would have thought Epstein had defenses, and then but you're right, Cynthia. He could have absolutely gone to Israel and lived in Israel, and Israel would not have extradited him. Um, the Yeah, and particularly his crimes. I mean, if his crimes were so serious, then the Israel might have said no. Unlikely, but Israel did say no to Meyer Lansky, the notorious gangster. He did want to he did seek asylum in Israel. Israel did not grant Meyer Lansky asylum, but they would have granted him asylum. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to why he didn't. If he knew this was coming, and I'm sure he had to have known that this was coming, and he couldn't have caught him by surprise. The DOJ was to come after him. Why he didn't stay in Israel, and then once he was under arrest, why he would commit suicide? It doesn't really make a great deal of sense. So yeah, that's it's a good question. I can't answer the question. I think that would strengthen the argument that he was murdered, because the the suicide angle just doesn't really make a great deal of sense. I mean, I think he would have a reasonable shot at getting the charges dismissed, even with all the Me Too hysteria. I think he would have had a reasonable shot at getting the charges dismissed. Um, anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And of course, Cynthia, and I always say this, and I think it's very important. Cynthia is our film scholar and expert with an encyclopedic knowledge of cinema history. And she provides us with extraordinarily detailed, fascinating background information on the films that we screen on Monday night. And so we always learn a great deal from Cynthia's extraordinarily informative commentary. And so, you know, um, we screen the movies Monday night, so watch the movies. It's always something good. Watch the movie, and as you do so, savor the fascinating information that Cynthia provides. Information, her judgments, her aesthetic criticisms, about the music, the cinematography, everything, all the kinds of details that you might miss. You just as you get caught up in watching a movie, but this Cynthia reminds us all the various details that go into the making of a movie. So thank you so much for all of that, Cynthia. It's an amazing amount of work that you do for us. Anyway, Cynthia then says, one of my favorite aspects of The Sting is how it slowly serves up a tale of sweet, cold revenge. So perhaps you could consider the theme of revenge for a movie, Paul, on the Gaggle. Good idea. Revenge. It's a very interesting. I mean, revenge, of course, is obviously a big a big topic. Um, and I mean, you've already listed the Revenge for Future. So you Obsession, 1949. Okay. Winchester, 73. The Virgin Spring. Um, Harakiri, 19. Yeah. Cape Fear, 1962. Point Blank, 1967. Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Get Carter, 1971. And Lady Snowblood. Um, Interesting. Or they're all interesting selection. Yes, we have shown Get Carter. Uh, I wouldn't have exactly described. Yeah, I guess I would get whether it's exactly a revenge film. I mean, get. I mean, yes, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, he basically wants to find out what happened to his brother. But I guess it's an interesting one in that it's a revenge that goes wrong because in Get Carter, um, Carter is very quickly in over his head. I mean, we know right away as he goes up to face these gangsters, he's in over his head, and this is going to end badly. But yeah, that's an interesting one. It's a good theme, revenge, and of course you've got the greatest of all the revenge stories, of course, is the Count of Monte Cristo. But I don't know whether any of the movies really did justice to the great novel. But that's the the ultimate um, revenge story. Um, the problem I had with the Sting is, the guy that they conned is supposed to be this big time gangster. Well, how did this big time gangster fall for such an obvious ploy? I mean, it's like we know this is a con. I mean, we're watching the con. I mean, you have to be really stupid to fall for such a con. But then even after he falls for the con, why would anyone think that the Robert Redford and Paul Newman, the two grifters, are now going to be safe having pulled off this con, because this gangster, is going to come after them. He's not going to appreciate being conned out of $500,000, which, and but at that time, $500,000, that was some serious money. He's going to come after them. So it's not exact, to me, it's like not a very plausible kind of happy ending. I mean, if ever there's going to be revenge, it's the gangster who's going to come after them. But anyway, that's a really interesting idea. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Um, so have I now answered? Everybody's clear. Um, Marty says Kaya Kalas never wears the same outfit twice. No, I would imagine, but it's still a possibility though that she forgot to clean a dress. I mean, yeah, it takes a bit of work. I mean, like if somebody forgot, or maybe it's just didn't bring enough outfits for her for this meeting with the EU, and she's now in an embarrassing position. There's things like that happen. Anyway, so thank you very much, everybody who joined me. Thank you for all the interesting commentary uh, on Kaya Kalas. We will be we'll have some podcasts over the weekend, and then next Monday we'll have the joint live stream with Peter, and then next Tuesday is going to be time for the solo. I hope you'll all be able to join me then. Until we meet again, have a good night. Don't get too miserable, and I'll see you very soon. All the best. Bye bye.